Okay, that is our presentation. Now it's time to answer your questions. So our first one is, would a property management company need a contractor's license for valid employment experience? So not necessarily. Property management sometimes does a lot of small work, painting, changing out, electrical socket or something. Uh, and once again, that would be experience in those various trades, painting, drywall, and everything, even done on a very limited basis for a property management company. That can be listed as experience. But once again, it would also depend on the classification that you're going for. In other words, property management experience wouldn't really count towards a B classification, as you're not really building anything. We do have the B2 classification, which does kind of fall into some of that area of small work on existing systems. So a lot of it would depend on the classification you're going for. Number two, will this deck be shared? Yes, this will be archived. I believe it's on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to watch the entire program in its entirety on our YouTube channel. Can you go over the 10 years experience limitation mentioned? No, we'll only look at experience for the past 10 years from when we receive your application. So if you received your application today, we would only look at experience going back to 8/5 of 2012. When submitting the application along with the money order, to clarify, what is the amount to be submitted? So once again, it'll depend on the type of application that you're submitting and 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 what classifications you're going for. So if we're dealing with a first time submitting to get a license, you're at the very beginning of the application, it'll have your fee breakdown. So for a single classification, for a one-time contractor, you're going to pay $450 is what's required up front for your application fee. Then at the end of the process, after you've tested, there is an initial license fee, and that is determined by your entity. So if you're a sole owner, you'd be paying an additional $200. If it's a non-sole owner, corporate LLC, then you're going to be paying $350 for that initial license fee. From the time you submit application to getting your test date, how long does that approximately take? Once again, kind of a subjective question. Depends on our processing backlog, which currently right now is at about 3 to 4 weeks. And then it would depend on the completed application. So if everything is there in the application that is needed and no corrections are needed, possibly 3 to 4 weeks before you would get your test date. Now, your test date would be another 3 or so weeks past that date of when they posted a completed application. If your application is missing or needs corrections, obviously they're going to send out a corrections letter to you explaining what is needed. Then it's going to be dependent upon how much time it takes for you to get those corrections back in. However, you won't go to the end of the line. At that point, you will have a technician for your application. Those corrections will go directly to that technician, and they will process them in date order with other corrections that they have received. So if everything is precisely in order, you can look at the website to see what the processing times and figure your application is going to take that much time plus an additional 3 or so weeks to your actual test date. Is foreign experience as a worker valid to count as the 4 years of experience? Yes, work done outside of the country can still apply depending upon the classification that you're going for. But once again, for that certification of work experience that you're going to send in, as any work experience certification, it has to be certified by someone who has firsthand knowledge of you performing the work. So if your work was performed in England, then there would need to be somebody who could certify for the work performed in England that had firsthand knowledge of that work being performed. The main thing is to have someone who has firsthand knowledge, and if it's in a foreign situation, it would be certified by somebody who was in the same area as the work experience is being claimed. Next question. What if I don't have a company yet? Can I still get a contractor's license? Yes. That company is, your company can be yourself. So, my name is Ronald Janes. My company, uh, for the contractor's license could just be named Ronald Janes for a sole owner license. Now, if you at later time uh, want to change the name of that company, or if you form a corporation, there are provisions to change the name on your license to that company or change from a sole owner into a corporation. But yes, you don't have to have as such a company name when you first get your contractor's license. It can just be under your name personally if you want for a sole owner. I've been a job site supervisor for a structural steel contractor. Can I apply for the same license type? Uh, yes, for supervisors on the certification of work experience, they're going to look for a little more information as to how you became a supervisor. For the most part, we're looking for hands-on work in the classification that you're working for. So if you have been working for as a supervisor, you just want to explain a little bit as to how you became a supervisor. So in other words, after working for this company for, you know, X number of years, became a supervisor, and from this date to this date performed the duties of a supervisor, overseeing the employees performing the specific trades that you would want to list for that experience. So for a supervisor, we just need a little more detail as to your job uh, kind of travel. In other words, how you became that supervisor, which would have gained you the experience becoming that supervisor. Current contractor has a C51 over 5 years and a B license for 1 year. Can I apply for both licenses? Uh, it doesn't really matter the contractor having held the license, whether you can apply. You can apply for any license classification uh, that you have 4 years of experience in. Now, if you're going to use that contractor as the place that you gain that experience, you wouldn't be able to show that for the B license, as that contractor has only held that B license for 1 year. So your experience with that contractor uh, should not have been in the B classification for any more than 1 year. And you need 4 years of experience in each classification that you would be applying for. If you're applying for your license initially, having not held either of those, you'd only be able to apply for one classification at a time. So your initial license application would just be for one classification that you have 4 years of experience within the last 10 years. So if your current contractor that you've been working for is a C51 for 5 years, that would be a possibility that you could go for, because you could show that you were working for a contractor that was performing C51 work for at least 4 years. Will owner builder work performed that was $500 and under be valid for some experience? Yes, any work that is performed is valid for experience. Once again, it would be the type of classification that you're going for. Owner builder is work performed on your primary residence work. And if that work was under $500, that could easily fall into, painting, could be some drywall work, small projects. Now that work wouldn't be applicable to a B classification, which is the only time that you can use owner builder work. So owner builder is for B classification only. And it has to be a project in which a structure was being built and utilizing 2 additional trades. The usually, although we will review any information sent in, the odds that you are doing a building project that was in the building of a structure and 2 additional trades and under $500 sometimes is a little hard to show. And also owner builder work, being for the B classification, will require permits and final inspection reports. Next question. So we have a 4-part one here. Is it easier to get the B2 license than a general B1 license? And the B2 license is the handyman license question. Can I use the experience from a B2 license to later get a B1 license? And the cost of the B2 license. So all of our licensing costs are the same no matter the classification. So the cost of doesn't change depending on the classification you're going for. So the B2 and the B general building. So neither is easier or harder to get to or get if you have the experience. So any license is easy to get if you have 4 years of experience in that particular trade. The general building, B classification, does have very specific guidelines to qualify for that one for the experience. One, the 4 years of experience has to be in connection to a structure being built. So they're looking for 4 years of experience in things with rough framing, rough carpentry, as well as 2 additional building trades other than carpentry. The B2 is exactly what it says, and it's not a handyman license, it's a residential remodeling license on wood structures. So I can see where people would think handyman because you're doing smaller instances of trade work. You're doing electrical and plumbing, but that's to an existing system. You're not installing the plumbing system or the electrical system. You're changing out lights, you're installing or changing out plumbing, toilet, sinks, things like that to an existing plumbing system. So, and in that case, you have to show 4 years of projects that 3 trades were used on. So one is not easier than the other. It's just dependent upon the experience you have. And the general breakdown between the two is structural building. If you have been building structures and using additional trades, that would fall towards the general B. If you are doing just trade work, multiple trade work, then that would fall towards more in the residential remodeling because structural building will not be taking effect in the B2. Can I use the experience from a B2 license to later get a B license? In some degree, yes, because you're doing additional trade work. But once again, the B license, when you get to that point, is going to need 4 years of structural building, which you can't actually do under the B license. You could get the additional trade work on those projects, but those projects aren't going to show a building or a structural build. So it will give you experience in additional trade work. It won't give you the necessary structural part for the B classification. All right, our next question. If you're applying for an electrical or plumbing license, do you need to have completed an apprenticeship or qualified experience? Okay. Qualifying experience, once again, we're looking for journeyman level experience. So apprenticeship can be used if you have a plumbing or electrical apprenticeship. You can send in that completed certificate and that will get you credit towards your experience, but it is not required for you to have an apprenticeship in electrical or plumbing to get your electrical or plumbing license. 4 years of qualifying journeyman level or higher experience will get you a license just the same as an apprenticeship will help. And the apprenticeship won't get you the license. At the most, if it's directly relatable, uh, as the chart showed, would be 36 months. You're always going to have, at a minimum, 1 year of practical experience, uh, even with an apprenticeship. Did you mention that our experienced certifier does not need to be a licensed contractor? It can be a client. Uh, Client is a little more difficult, but it can. So anyone, once again, your experienced certifier can be anyone who has seen you firsthand knowledge of you performing the trade work that they're going to list on that certification. So it could be another contractor that worked on the project that you were working on and saw you perform the trades. It could be your employer. It could be an employee of your employer. You could be self-employed and someone witness it. Sometimes the difficulty with a client, even though a client can be your experienced certifier, sometimes a client is for one project. So if that project lasted 1 month, you'd have to do individual certificates, workers experience certificates to show that time period. So that client, if it was just for that one project, would be listing for the 1 month that you worked on the project for that client. And then if it was for another client, you would need another work certification for that one. So uh, they can only certify for the experience that they have seen you perform hands-on. Does the CSLB recommend any other preparation testing companies to prepare for the contractor's exam? We are not, we do not suggest any other testing preparation companies or schools, and we are not affiliated to any testing preparation or schools. All the schools that claim to help you with your testing are helping you in a generalized form and not in conjunction with the CSLB. We don't recommend or coordinate with any other testing companies or schools. So a two-part question. With 4-year Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, do I still need to study for and take the exam? What exams will I take for the B1 exam or the B2? Yes, everybody will take the exam unless you have held the classification that you're applying for in the last 5 years or have completed the tests on a previous application that may not have been completed uh, in the last 5 years. So if you have not completed the testing in the last 5 years for the classification you're applying for, or if you have not held that classification that you're applying for in the last 5 years, everyone will take the exam. And the exams for all of the classifications, the law and business is exactly the same no matter what classification you're applying for. And then each other classification will have its own individual trade exam, with the exception of C61 specialty D classes. They will have no trade exam, but you will perform the law exam. All right. To acquire a contractor's license in Arizona, do we need to take only their trade exam since we acquired in that state? Not sure what you're asking. We aren't affiliated with Arizona, other than we do have some reciprocity for someone who has held a license in Arizona to come here and not take one of our trade exams if they've held that license for a certain amount of time in good standing in a reciprocal class that we also have here. As far as what they require in Arizona to get a license, that I wouldn't know. You would need to contact Arizona. We aren't, while we do some reciprocity with Arizona, we don't coordinate as far as requirements for a contractor's license. Uh, and then since we acquired in that state, so if you have a license in Arizona, you can still have someone do a certification of work experience for your experience there. And if you're looking to not take our trade exam, you would go into the reciprocity part of our website, and it will explain to you the process for reciprocity to not have to take our trade exam when applying here. It requires sending a form to Arizona that they complete stating your license, when it was issued, who was the qualifier, and if it's been in good standing, you would include that with your application, and they would review that document when you send in your application to see if it qualifies for reciprocity with that state and the classification that you are applying for. And if all of those match up, then yes, you wouldn't have to take our trade exam for that classification. What books would I study for the B2 license? So, as with all of our classification, there are study guides on our website for each classification that will give you examples. And on those guides at the end of it will show some resource books that they may have referenced to develop the exam as to questions and everything, but there is no book that is out there that will basically tell you uh, what you need to study for the exam. It is just a knowledge base from your experience in performing that and what that classification allows you to perform. And those questions rotate as well. So each exam will not necessarily have the exact same questions. Uh, but all of them will be based on the information in those study guides, resources of where they got the information to create the exam. First step is to submit my application. After this, do I need to attend to a certain course? So no. Um, correct. Your first step is to submit your application with the proper fees. That will be assigned a technician according to our processing workload. Once it has technician, they will review that application for completeness. If it is completed, they will post it, and then you will receive a notice that you are eligible to then schedule your examinations through PSI, our testing partners. And then once you have scheduled your exam, you would go and take your exam. After your exam is passed and completed, you would then be getting a notification of your issuance requirements, and this would be your contractor's bond, your workers' comp if you're going to have employees, uh, your initial license fee and everything, but there is no course with the CSLB to prepare for examinations or the application process. Certain schools I do know offer that uh, benefit, but once again, they are not affiliated with us, so they're preparing you in a general manner. As a veteran, do I get both expedited application review and expediting test date? The exam fee is covered in the examination fee. Correct on, so part one, as a veteran, do I get both expedited application review and expedited test date? So with our PSI testing now, used to, there was a delay after posting the application for about 3 weeks or so. And once again, this is depending upon their backlog, but they now have more test sites than we used to have when just issued by the Contractor State Licensing Board. So the veteran status for expediting is as long as you submit your DD 214, which shows discharge status, an honorable discharge status for a DD 214 will allow any veteran to get the expedited processing. And then once the processing, you'll actually be scheduling your test date with PSI. And depending upon your area and their backlog, there's no delay in getting your test date assigned. So before, everybody had about a 3 to 4 week delay at least before they got a test date. The military veterans, they had expedited test dates for them. Now with PSI and the additional testing centers and additional dates and times for tests, there really isn't a delay. As soon as you're posted and referred over to set your test date with PSI, you can pretty much get a test date fairly well as soon as possible within workload examples. The exam fee, correct. Your first exam fee is covered in the application fee. Should you need to re-exam, then there is a re-examination fee, rescheduling fee of $100 for that. But the first exam fee is covered in the application fee. Can I use my experience in building a home for a sibling to apply for owner build license? Once again, we will review any experience that you send in to see if it applies. Owner builder experience, however, is for your primary residence and for the B classification only. So building a home for another person uh, would still count as experience. I mean, if you know they were paying you to build their home for them, and as long as you had permits for that building and final inspections for that building, then that experience, while it wouldn't be actually owner builder, it would be more self-employed building, uh, then yes, once again, it's experience. We will review it to see if it applies. Um, but once again, building the home, there should be permits and final inspection reports that can back up that experience that shows who was responsible for the building. And if you have that documentation, they'll review it and apply any appropriate experience to your application. Can the license application be filled out and submitted online? Not at this time. They are working on that to put the actual application process online, but has not been completed as of yet. You can fill out, most of the applications do have an easy fill option online. So you can go in and actually type all your information into the form online, but you will still need to fill it out and then physically sign the application. And I believe when you use the Easy Fill, you also have to remember to physically put in your social security number after printing out, as it doesn't retain that information. It also doesn't retain the application information once you're done and print it out as well. It is just an easy fill option so that you can type the information versus having to write it all in uh, at this time anyway. How do I become an RME on our corporation's existing A license? So one, RME is a responsible managing employee. So if you're an employee of the company, you could potentially become a responsible managing employee. They would send in an application if they already have the A license and you're going to replace the person who had the A classification, you're looking at a application to replace the qualifying individual. You would put yourself down as an RME, and as an RME, you can't have ownership in the corporation. So if you have ownership within the corporation, you wouldn't be a responsible managing employee. You would be, at that point, you'd be a responsible managing officer or whatever title you held within the corporation. But responsible managing employee just means that you're an employee of the company who is going to be the person who has 4 years of experience in the A classification and become the qualifying individual for that corporation and holds no percentage of the corporation. As an owner builder, that experience only applies to a general B license. Remodeling as an owner builder, flipper does not count towards the B license. That is correct. So owner builder would be the building of a structure. Now, if you have bought a house and are doing structural changes to it, all of which will need to be permitted, and those permits show you as the person responsible for the permit and the final inspections and everything, it wouldn't be owner builder experience. It would just be self-employed experience that could apply to your general B license. But once again, for general B, you're going to show structural building as a major part of what you need to show for the B license. Just going in and remodeling, as you say, doing drywall and painting and putting in new cabinets, all of that would go towards those individual classifications, or possibly a B2 residential remodeling classification, but it wouldn't go towards the B license. The general B license wants framing and carpentry experience only. What qualifies as carpentry? So framing and rough carpentry. So framing, structural building, structural supports, things like that, are the carpentry that the B classification is looking for. Not trim work, not crown molding, not cabinetry. That is C6 work, millwork and cabinetry, and that wouldn't qualify as an additional trade. So framing and rough carpentry, as well as 2 other additional trades. So your projects for 4 years of experience would need to be in the building of a structure, framing, rough carpentry, as well as something like plumbing and electrical, or it could be plumbing and drywall and painting. So main trade of framing and rough carpentry, as well as 2 other additional trades are required for the general B license. All right, our next question. I have a BS in civil engineering and an MS in structural engineering. How many years of experience credit can I get? So they're only going to take the one uh, degree that will give you the most experience. They won't combine the two. So, and once again, it'll also depend on what you're going for. So, civil engineering, if you're going for engineering, uh, once again, would need to be reviewed once it is sent in, uh, and how it applies to the classification that you're going for. So, past that, until we actually see the degree and the classification that you're going for, I couldn't give you any more information other than what our basic chart has shown you. Learn more about CSLB reciprocity here. Yes. So if you go to that, it will explain the process of the reciprocity, the form you'd need to send into the other state as well. So thank you on that. All right. I have a PE license as mechanical engineering in California, working for federal government. Performed design of HVAC for 20 years as designer and supervisor with expertise or experience for C20. So design doesn't really count for experience. They're looking for installation. What have you installed? Your PE license really won't affect that engineering. And once again, so for the C20, they're going to look for work you've performed in the trade of HVAC, not designing the system, but the installing of the system. So design doesn't really count towards the experience. It'll be more what you've done as far as installing of the HVAC. Now, your work for the federal government, if in that capacity, would count towards your experience if you were installing the systems. Doesn't matter whether you did it for the federal government or for a contractor, any experience towards installing of the systems would count towards your experience. Carpentry is cabinet making, milling, trim work, hanging doors. Is there a definition that you go by? If you look in the classifications section on our website, that is many of the same definitions that we go by as well. So, but once again, that's finish carpentry for us versus rough carpentry, which we put into the framing category. Framing of structural, you'll see the breakdown on our website between C5 framing and C6 millwork cabinetry work. All right. What would be very helpful for your CSLB is if you took questions over the various WebEx meetings and put together FAQ PDF with a search field. Once again, the information we're providing today is very general. A lot of people have more specific questions. All the general questions information is also available on our website. But we also have a couple different email addresses that you can send direct information questions into for your specific situation. Anything relating to classifications or what class you may need for certain projects. We have classifications, and that's plural, classifications at cslb.ca.gov. That our classifications deputy will take the information that you've provided and tell you what classification you would be looking at, or sometimes classifications, multiple classifications, depending on the scope of the projects that you are looking to use your license for. The other email address is licensing at cslb.ca.gov. That goes to our licensing division, and you can ask more specific questions to your situation, and those will be addressed directly by someone in the department that it would apply to. So licensing at cslb.ca.gov, as well as classifications at cslb.ca.gov. When the application is accepted, do I select the time frame to testing, or is a date assigned? How long can I defer testing in order to get prepared for the test? So for the time frame, as I said, in the past, there was always a mandatory 3-week wait based on workload. And the way the testing was set up for CSLB designated testing centers. Now that we have partnered with PSI Testing, they have more testing locations, more testing times. They actually do weekend, I think Saturday test dates as well. So the wait time is much smaller, but you will actually set the time of your test date. So once you've been your application has been accepted, you'll receive a correspondence in the mail that says you're eligible to schedule your testing and give you information on how to set up your account with PSI. And then you go into their system and actually choose your test date. One is not automatically assigned for you. How long can you defer your testing? That I would refer you over to PSI when you have your application in and everything. Uh, you have 18 months to complete the testing process. So from the time your application is posted, you have 18 months uh, to complete the testing portion of your application. Uh, I don't know, but I don't want to tell you a wrong answer. I don't know that there's a defer time. In other words, you could schedule a test date whenever you wanted to on their calendar as long as it would let you put it out. Uh, I know when we had the testing centers, CSLB ourselves, I think they did it in 90-day testing. So from the point that you were originally posted, you had to have a test date within at least 90 days, and then you could always decide to reschedule that test date for longer once that time came up. But that may have changed. If you want to send that question in to licensing at cslb.ca.gov, we'll provide you with PSI test uh, correspondence, either phone number or their email address, of which you'd be able to find out that information. Is the office in Berkeley open? So all CSLB test sites, I believe at this point, have closed as of July 1st, and all of our testing has been partnered over to PSI. So I believe PSI may have testing locations in the Berkeley area, but our actual CSLB testing site for Berkeley is closed. The other person who asked about building for a sibling wouldn't be breaking any 500 laws building the house, since he would be a self-employed individual rather than an entity working under a contract. He couldn't pull a permit to do the work. So once again, if we're operating in a contractor capacity, if you're being hired to perform a work, if you're writing a contract for the work without a license, $500 is the extent of that contract. Uh, if you're building a house for a sibling, you would definitely want to check with your labor laws and everything as to uh, pulling a permit for building the entire house. So you have to build a structure, at least in most anywhere in California, a permit would be required to build the house. There could be exceptions, but it would be something you'd want to check with both your building agencies as well as the permitting agencies to make sure you're within the purview. If you're accepting money for building and it's over $500, you need to have a license. I worked for a contractor self-employed. My license application required to specific as self-employed. Yes, there is a spot on the application for self-employed. Um, and this is where it gets a little confusing sometimes. So I worked for a contractor as self-employed. We look at that as you were actually employed. Now, that contractor may have only employed you for one project, and you may have been paid by 1099 tax status. We look at that as an employer relationship. While you weren't on his payroll and you didn't follow that contractor around to multiple projects, that to us, in our eyes, is employment. So you would still, on your certification of work experience, you'd list the contractor's name as the person that you gain the experience under and their license number. And then someone who had firsthand knowledge of the work that you performed for that contractor, even on a self-employed style basis, would just need to certify it. It could be the contractor, it could be somebody else who worked on that project with you, uh, but but we still look at that as an employer relationship when it is a contractor hiring you as an individual, even for just a project. If I built a project as a kit, shelving, organizer, shed, wardrobe, shelving for a homeowner, could I offer installation as part of the kit and charge more than $500 until be within the legalities? No. The $500 limit is for the entire project. So materials, labor, anything involved with whatever it is you're contracting to perform. If you're building a shed and the cost of the materials and your labor to build that shed goes over $500, then you would need a license. Now, there are certain things that if you're building a shed for yourself, that's a different. But if you're charging somebody to build something, it is the total cost of the project, material and labor, and you can't break it up into two two small contracts. It's the total cost of what you're doing. Where do I turn in my application? So on the application itself, it'll have the address for the CSLB. One thing to keep in mind, if you're just sending it in by regular mail, you can send it to either address, the Business Park Drive address or the P.O. Box. If you're sending it by either registered or certified or overnight, anything that requires a signature, be sure to send it to the physical address, the Business Park Drive address location listed on the application. And that way there is someone there to sign for the application when it comes in requiring a signature. You can also turn it in at our front counter here in Sacramento or any other front counters that do cashiering as well. All right, we'll wait a few minutes if anybody else has any additional questions. If I spent a year building a house, but the framing and concrete work took only 6 months and the rest was drywall, painting, cabinets, etc., the work experience still covers the year time frame for the B1 general license. Not necessarily. So once again, when you say I spent a year building a house, if this was a owner builder project, they're going to look at the reasonable amount of time a contractor would have taken to complete the project. So I'm building my house, but I'm only doing it a little bit at a time, and it takes me 2 years. And then in my owner builder description that I send in, I'm going to list the trades that were performed, put on a roof, frame the house, drywall. They're going to look at the scope of the project, how big the house was, what the permit shows, the trades performed, and they're going to assign experienced deputy will assign an amount of time that a reasonable contractor working full time would have taken to build the house. So while I may have taken 2 years to have built it, doing it part time or when I can, they may only assign 6 months because that would have been the reasonable amount of time a contractor would have taken to perform that work. So not necessarily the time it took to complete the project, but the time that it should take to complete the project by a full-time contractor. What if the build is done by one person as an owner builder rather than a contractor with a crew? Once again, they're going to look at the scope of the project and estimate what a regular contractor would have done to have performed the work. They're not going to necessarily look at it as, oh, a contractor with 10 people in the crew could have done this in 2 months. I took 6 months to do it. they're going to look at the scope of the project and how many man hours it would have taken and assign that experience according to that. So each of those projects are looked at individually by the experienced deputy and assigned amount of time according to the trades involved, the size of the project, and things like that. What constitutes a contract from a product I sell for $2,000, as in the case of a wardrobe organizer? Well, if you're writing a contract to provide the product and install it, you know, once again, it's going to be the scope of the project. So a wardrobe organizer, it's depending of whether it's a pre-manufactured thing that you're just putting in place, or if it's something that you're actually assembling and anchoring, and if it requires any kind of installation of electrical, lighting, things like that. But once again, without a license, $500 is your limit for material and installation. So if the wardrobe itself costs $2,000 and you're charging for the cost of it and installing it, you're over the $500 limit. If you're just selling the wardrobe and not installing it, that we don't regulate that. That's sales. Hopefully that made that a little more clear. All right, we've got a few more minutes. If anybody else has a last minute question. All right. Is there, oh, not a question. All right. You're welcome. I'm glad we could provide this and hopefully help somebody get started on their process for getting their contractor's license. All right. So to sell a prefab shed I think we lost part of the question there. So to sell a prefab shed, that's retail sales. We don't govern that at all. But if you're selling the shed in conjunction with installing the shed, then that falls under contractor. And so if you sell the shed, once again, it's not you can't separate out the if you're selling it with the intention of installing it as well, your project can't be higher than $500. Prefab shed, probably, if it's already put together and everything, you're looking at a D pre-manufactured, I think it's D34. Gonna make me actually make sure I've got so prefabricated, that's the same classification, D34, installing office equipment, setting up office cubicles, just putting a shed. But then once again, it's going to depend on what you're doing. If you're making a concrete slab to set that shed on, you're now crossing into multiple classifications and everything. So once again, a good place to start would be the classifications deputy. Classifications at cslb.ca.gov describe to them exactly what you are installing and how you do it, whether you're framing anything, whether you're laying a slab of concrete to mount it onto. But once again, if you're just selling somebody a shed, that's retail sales. We don't cover that. As soon as you include a sale with installation on it, then yes, that installation is going to be covered by the contractor's board. And it is the whole scope of the project, material as well as installation. All right. We'll give one more minute here for any other questions, and then we'll. All right. Oop, I missed one here. Can a homeowner just pay an individual an hourly rate rather than as a contractor? Well, when you say that, it's what that person is doing. If they're coming in and redoing drywall, if they're coming in and painting a house, if they're coming in and building a shed, once again, that's covered under the contractor's board. C33 painting, D9 drywall, prefabricated installation, D34. So once again, it's going to be covered. If all you're doing is the homeowner says, come in and paint my wall, or I bought this shed somewhere, and can you mount it on a already made platform out in my backyard, then yeah, as long as it's under $500, you can do that work. But as soon as you go over, if somebody says, hey, can you paint 3 rooms of my house, and how much will it cost? If they're not providing the paint, if you're providing the paint, you're charging them for the paint on the contract and performing it, and it's over $500, you now need a license. So once again, and it's the whole scope. So if you're selling the shed and installing it, it's all one project, even if you try and break it up separate things. You're doing both. All right. So that's our time for today for our workshop. Thank you for all your questions. Once again, if you still have others after the workshop today, send them into licensing at cslb.ca.gov. If you have any other questions, the address is on the screen there as well. Licensing at cslb.ca.gov. At some point, you need to reschedule your exam. You can get that process done by dropping an email to exams@cslb.ca.gov. We've also put together a list of available resources for women considering a career in construction. If you haven't already, be sure to download this presentation to get them. You can download the presentation on a green banner on the top of our homepage at www.cslb.ca.gov. If you're watching the archive video of this workshop on our YouTube page, you'll find a link to the presentation below. We welcome your comments on topics for future webcasts. Just drop us an email at social@cslb.ca.gov. Special thanks to our licensing division and public affairs office for their help on this workshop. The Get Licensed to Build workshop is a copyrighted production of the California Contractor State Licensing Board. Thank you for watching.